Kyle here from All Media Reviews, here to start, and I'll just go through it as quickly as I can. The modern progressive art rock, modern progressive art rock, story, calendar telling, history telling of sorts. Um, and I, this is not the last type. The ideal is to do some kind of visual, um, like narrative thing, but that's still on the back burner, of course. But um, I'm not going to be doing this immediately in terms of really progressive art rock. Modern progressive art rock began really in the 2000s, the early part of the 2000s, but its origins trace further back. The challenge is that there's so much kind of music that really led up to its creation, you could say, in some ways, progressive rock included, just traditional, the different history of progressive rock. So what I'm doing for this particular first part, the first two parts, is going to be the immediate sort of origins, and that would be the 1990s. Then I think I'll probably, just as a plan, probably just go through each year in the 2000s, which is more extensive, and either after that, in the 2000s and the 2010s, after that, either after that or somewhere maybe in the, I'm going to do the further back origins. I've done a lot of research the last few days with that, and over the last few months, really, going back to the 1960s. It's just, it ballooned out. It's just, there's too much. There's too much to truncate entirely. So, all right, I'll just get in. So the first part, this is the first half of the 1990s, sort of a calendar telling, what led to sort of the creation. Modern progressive art rock, or art rock and progressive art rock, is progressive rock to me, but not necessarily focusing on chops. It's more about sort of being creative um with music, but it can be pop, it can be kind of, you know, what's the word? Textured, atmospheric. It can be power pop, it can be influenced by punk, it can be influenced by metal, it can be influenced by funk, by soul and R&B. It can be influenced by directly by progressive rock, but not necessarily sounding exactly like Yes or Genesis. But so it's kind of a sponge, just like progressive rock, but a sponge of a new kind. Of course, it draws largely on what was college rock, and then alternative rock, especially, and then indie rock, whatever you want to call that, the last 35, 40 years. Um, but it draws on classic rock too, and classic pop, and a lot of other styles, jazz fusion, blues rock, folk rock, especially with harmonies and arrangements, and studio, using the studio. And there's a lot of different space, or there's a lot of different things that it's kind of influenced by. That's why the pre, not even 1990 stuff, it's kind of all, it's really the argument can be made, and a lot of singer songwriters. So in 1990, that, I'm not going to go through this explanation on any, probably, of these other ones, but 1990 is the first year for this video, and it only has 4 albums. But the first one, let me get my camera out so I have my list. First one is Toy Matinees, which came out on June 27th, 1990. Kevin Gilbert and Patrick Leonard, sort of, very kind of clever pop, as I call it, project. But June 27th, 1990, this came out. It was progressive rock, but not, it didn't sound like Yes or Genesis exactly. That's the thing. So now, the next month, in July of 1990, July 27th, Jellyfish's Belly Button, their debut album, came out, which shared a lot in common with Toy Matinee. I know that they were aware of each other. At least I know that Kevin Gilbert was aware of Jellyfish. But yeah, very big Queen and power pop influence. Many kind of pop like songs. Although I found the Jellyfish are one of the most important bands to where and how progressive art rock really came to being. So yeah, their debut album Belly Button came out July 27th, just a little over, like, 2 months, less than 2 months after Toy Matinee, the debut album. And I don't want to screw this up. And then, let's see here. The next month, so it was really much these three came out in that summer. The King's X had been a band, and they'll be traced before the 90s, but their first album in the 90s, Faithful Love, probably their most commercially successful album, and they had their biggest hit is Love. Faithful Love came out August 21st, 1990. So again, they're progressive, but they're interested in songwriting and being creative and using atmosphere and using kind of different styles of the Beatles and Jimi Hendrix and um, funk, But anyway, Faithful Love, their third album, came out August 21st, 1990. And then to round out, oh, I got that wrong actually. This came out October 23rd, but I don't have a copy of. August 21st was actually Jane's Addiction's Ritual de L'Habitual. So, yeah, that summer came out with Toy Matinee, Jellyfish, and Jane's Addiction. That was the second Jane's Addiction album, technically the third, but the second proper album, which had their most progressive song in 3 days, and great record. But King's X Faithful Love rounded out the 1990s sort of origins of progressive art rock in the 90s with Faithful Love. That was October 23rd. So that was it for 1990. Really, I mean, there's other records that probably could be included, but I'm just including those for now. So then in 1991, the next year, we had these sort of not the last album, but maybe the last great album from Queen, which certainly had a big influence on a lot of the progressive art rock of the 2000s. The style they were prog, but they weren't prog. They were interested in doing like creative things in the studio and vocal harmonies and stuff. Of course, this is Innuendo. Show must go on. So certainly an important record if you were going to write music 10 years later that wanted to be drawing upon prog, but also just not worrying about chops and guitar solos. So Innuendo from Queen on it was February 4th, 1991. So moving along in 1991, then all the way back on to June, I'm including now Marillion. Marillion, while they are considered progressive rock first and foremost, especially where they sort of evolved through, and including this album Holidays in Eden, which came out June 24th, 1991, kind of like to mix the sort of atmospheric songwriting with the psychedelic and the catchiness, especially when Hogarth joined the band, even before that. But Holidays in Eden, Marillion's catalog certainly is part of the influence on progressive art rock, and because they were progressive, but they also were art rock, really. Holidays in Eden, which has many songs that were kind of intended for radio, and also songs that were doing kind of different things, and then they have a suite, This Town, The Rake's Progress, and 100 Nights. That's progressive to me. Kind of it's very much of a story suite of a tale. But anyway, The Party's another song on here. But anyway, Marillion's Holidays in Eden, June 24th, 1991. So then a couple months later, while this band would maybe be first and foremost classified as metal or progressive metal, they really combine grunge and sort of the power pop or the pop element of the Beatles. The Galactic Cowboys, their debut album, the self-titled debut album, came out August 20th, 1991. So moving along in 1991, you're getting some little things here that are bands that are influenced by prog, but also interested in just doing catchy music, creating melodies, so vocal harmonies. They definitely were huge fans of the Beatles and King's X, of course. So from Texas, produced by Sam Taylor, who worked with King's X too on this album. The self-titled August 20th, 1991. So then the last one I have from 91, I'm including the U2 album Achtung Baby, which November 18th, 1991. I don't have a physical copy of that either, unfortunately, but Achtung Baby, certainly the edge as a guitar tone. They weren't just a standard pop band. They weren't completely dumbing down. U2 to me has always been at least forward thinking in their sort of approach to doing different styles. Achtung Baby doesn't sound like their other stuff, so they were progressing, and they were beyond being influenced by the Smiths or I don't know, maybe the Clash. They were influenced by Pink Floyd. They would never deny that. And probably some other stuff actually. U2 buried it within this sort of commercial gamut, this massive band that one of the biggest bands on the planet. There's a lot of progressive leanings on a lot of their music, and Achtung Baby is one of the best examples of that. It's a very diverse record, a lot of interesting textures, samples they use. Doesn't sound like the Joshua Tree that much, so it's the next step. So anyway, progressive art rock. They were art rock, really. They are, at some point, especially, and this is like the end of their peak period for some people. Achtung Baby, big influence on someone like ours, for example. So, and Jimmy and Echo. So 1992, where did it go? And I thought I grabbed it. There it is. I did put these in the right order. We had on March 10th the final Sam Taylor produced album from King's X, the self-titled. So stepping stone from Faith Hope Love. A lot of catchy tunes like Lost in Germany, but still really good chops and very creative arrangements on a lot of these songs. Great vocal harmonies, of course. The Doug and Ty dynamics. Yeah, this is progressive. It's art rock. I mean, I once heard a friend describe their style as being art metal, but yeah, no, progressive art rock is the King's X definitely had a big influence on the self-titled, certainly being one of those records. It's not quite as big as Faithful of Love or even the stuff from the 80s, but I don't know. It's splitting hairs, of course. So then you had that was on March 10th. Then you had on April 27th, the next month, XTC would release Nonsuch, which XTC is definitely art punk, art rock, art pop, because art pop is part of that sort of umbrella. And Nonsuch, while it's a long record, certainly was very creative. It was a follow up from the two records from the mid to late 80s, Oranges and Lemons and Skylarking, but it still has an influence as important. You know, Jellyfish certainly were big fans of this, even though maybe this influenced the second Jellyfish album, I'm not sure, but you know, it's influenced a lot of bands since. Bands like Field Music or whatever. So Nonsuch from XTC, we have was released originally on April 27th, 1992. So then you have let's see, it was a couple months later, June 8th, Faith No More. After following the real thing, the debut with Mike Patton, Faith No More were metal and alternative rock and funk and kind of experimental. This is some people regard it as their sort of masterpiece or their most sort of ahead of their time record. It influenced so many bands in the 2000s in metal and hard rock, funk. You know, Faith No More's Angel Dust. Well, it's not my favorite. It's got a lot of songs I think of for them and Mike Patton's vocal style. Midlife Crisis, for example. Be Aggressive, Small Victory, Smaller and Smaller. I talked about it in the Albums of the Year series. But yeah, Faith No More, even though they're not classified as progressive or even, they could be considered art metal or art hard rock or art funk. It's progressive and it had a big influence on many bands in the 2000s, especially that album, the albums that came after, and the albums before it. So then you have Peter Gabriel. That came out June 8th, Faith No More. Then on September 28th, 1992, you had Peter Gabriel's Us, the one that followed the massive commercial success of So Rather. This has, of course, Digging in the Dirt, which is a favorite of my wife's and many other people. But yeah, it's a good record. Steam's another really catchy track on this album. Secret World. Um, it's Peter Gabriel almost by definition could be considered art pop, you know, art pop rock, you know, and super influenced like Gorky. Think about it, a lot of artists in the 2000s draw from Peter Gabriel, his solo career, and you know, Us being one of them. So all right, move on to 1993. That was the last album from 92. So then we see the second and the final record from Jellyfish. Some people consider the masterpiece, probably the most important record in terms of the foundations of what I'm calling progressive art rock, because this is very much of a sort of sound collage and studio trickery, drawing on big layers and harmonies, but also just basically focusing on songs and not showing long keyboard solos. It has that pappy balance, but they threw everything in the kitchen sinks, like Apes and Androids and The Deer Hunter and oh man, there's a lot of bands that really followed in their footsteps, and this album was super important. It's got probably their most well-known song, "New Mistake." You know, joined a fan club. They were big Beatles fans. Jellyfish were super important in this style. Gluttonous Sympathy, Bye Bye Bye. It's a tour de force. It's like the sequel to Sergeant Pepper's or Night at the Opera in some ways. Big Beach Boys influence too, and Beach Boys have had a big influence on a lot of progressive art rock MPAR stuff. So Jellyfish's Spilt Milk released February 9th, 1993. So then you have, I'm not going to, I mean, I don't know if run the gamut with them, especially once we get into the 2000s, but I have to acknowledge the influence and importance of the debut album from Tool, Undertow, which came out April 6th, 1993. Yeah, you could consider them progressive metal, but hard rock metal, I don't know. it was a massively important record. I mean, their first three records, especially. I don't know about the last couple, but people have drawn so much influence on that, so it has to be in the origins of it. Tool's Undertow, April 6th, 1983. So then you have the second album from Galactic Cowboys, Space in Your Face, which came out on June 8th, 1993. Um, I, a lot of respects, it was even topped the first record. The melodies are even stronger. The production's stronger. It's Sam Taylor again. So many memorable moments, and it's just crazy. They topped it. Galactic Cowboys, Space in Your Face is a masterpiece for me, and it definitely had a big. It had an influence, either direct or indirect, on a lot of the sort of heavy art rock bands of the 2000s, because it was heavy but also melodic. And when they had some noodling, not that much. It was really more about the atmosphere and where the song kind of flowing. That's what progressive art rock, a lot of it does. So, Space in Your Face from Galactic Cowboys, June 8th, 1993. So then 3 days later, actually, you had the what is the second album technically, but probably the more visible album from Canada's The Tea Party, Splendor Solace. Huge influence by Led Zeppelin, Led Zeppelin 3, but with a vocalist kind of channeling his, Jim Morrison and Jeff Martin. That lot of this is just, it's using, very intricate melodies and layers, but again, it doesn't go on too long, and it's not about fancy lyrics necessarily, although Zeppelin did that. But yeah, the Tea Party, certainly second or third generation of you could say they're classic rock, but they're art rock too. Splendor Solace came out originally, what I've found, on June 11th, 1983. And then to round out 1983, you had another Canadian band that put out their debut album. You had I Mother Earth's Dig, which I've talked about this, and this band draws upon like funk and like Carlos Santana, but also influenced by Rush, but also influenced. They kind of had they were mixing grunge with sort of chops and funk, a little bit like what Faith No More did, and some other bands. I think they probably were influenced by Faith No More, but the drummer was just an outstanding musician. And so when they used their chops completely worked. It was very fluid, a lot of great inertia on it. So, I'm Mother Earth, their debut album Dig, August 10th, 1983, the final record from 1983 that sort of fits the origins of progressive art rock, in the influence from the 90s. So then the final year for this half of the early part of the 90s, the first half of the 90s, we have a few more records to mention that really found, again, and continued the evolution and the influence into what became progressive art rock. It was King's X's Dogman, the follow-up from the self-titled from 1992. January 18th, 1994, Dogman was released. And while they worked with Brendan O'Brien, who worked with Pearl Jam. They don't work with Sam Taylor, but on this they've kind of separated themselves with Sam Taylor, but they still have the sort of good musicianship with kind of it's their heaviest record, but in some ways darkest lyrically, but it still has this great kind of atmosphere and blues element to it. They covered Manic Depression from Jimi Hendrix Live at the end, but songs like Fool You has always been very kind of story and kind of atmospheric. Dogman, the lyrics are just so poignant. Because that's a big part of progressive art rock, I think. It's the lyrics. The lyrics definitely are. Well, it's not a concept album exactly. Songs like Pretend, Cigarettes. Oh man, trippy as hell. This was psychedelic. I think they kind of were focusing on some of the psychedelics. Even though Doug Pinnick does all the lead vocals on this album, it still it has been very influential on progressive metal to some degree, the detuning and grunge even. But still, you can say bands like Three and some other bands have been influenced by King's X, and you can say that this is on. I don't know if this is on Metal Blade. No, it wasn't. But Three, of course, ended up on Metal Blade too. But anyway, that was January 18th, 1994. Then the very next month, talked about this album left and right. The last few years on YouTube especially, but Marillion's Brave, this really separated them sonically, texturally, from a songwriting approach, and from a concept album. This is doing progressive stuff, but not, again, trying to be as flashy. I mean, I'm not including Dream Theater here because that's what a lot of people focus on. It's like, that's not really art metal. But this is art rock as much as it's progressive rock. It's telling the story of a fictional story of a girl who's running away and wants to take her life, of course. But it's just a trip, and it's poignant, it's moving, and there's only been a few records that have really ever reached me in some ways from a sort of melancholy standpoint. But stuff like Blackfield, Never Ending White Lights, they share in common with this. Even a lot of Porcupine Tree. And Steven Wilson appreciates this record. He remixed it at one point. So Marillion's Brave was released on February 7th, 1994. So then the final record I'm including from the first half of the 1990s that really helped pave the way to progressive art rock in the 2000s on is Jeff Buckley's Grace. Jeff Buckley has had a really big influence on modern singers, alternative rock, indie rock, whatever you want to call it, and the progressive stuff within that time frame. Jimmy Necco of Ours, Muse, Matt Bellamy, and this is his debut album, of course. Many great tracks on here. I just talked about it in my CD, Jeff Buckley CDs and the B's. But yeah, I mean, it's without Grace, definitely Ours would have sounded different. Muse would have sounded different. If who knows? Great singer. It's artsy, but also very much singer songwriter, but also very much showing like a blues influence, a Zeppelin influence, a folk influence, but there's so many layers, and the songs he covered he rearranged. Some progressive art rock has done some really interesting rearrangements, like Kevin Gilbert. So that was on I have the date here again. August 23rd, 1994. So that's it for the first half of the 1990s. I will go on to the second half of the 1990s hopefully next week, and then maybe get going on after I get through that. Starting from the year 2000, we'll be going through a lot of the more obscure stuff and just talking about these records that I showed in those slideshows earlier this year. So thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.